everybody, and welcome back to the Toasted Podcast. We're really excited to be here. I'm your co-host, Nick Varnoli. I'm here with Dr. Margie Wright. And we've got a very special guest with us today, Natalie Vardabasso, who not only is a sort of, I don't know. I like to think of you. We haven't really talked about like official titles, but I told Margie, I was like, we're going to have Natalie Vardabasso. And she's like, who's that? And I was like, well, she's kind of like a revolutionary assessment person. So I hope that's okay.
I'll take it. I'll take it.
Yeah. Yeah. So
we'll have to design you a sigil.
Please. Yeah. Yes. I'll put it on my profiles proudly.
I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Natalie, we'll let you talk about your own stuff, but I just want to upfront plug her podcast, which is EduCrush. It's a wonderful podcast with a lot to say about all things education, all things I think most of us would agree need to change or at least need to be thought about. So with that, Natalie, tell us a little bit about yourself. And your work.
Oh my gosh, how far back do we go? I'll stick to just education. I feel like it's important for people to know that I never wanted to be a teacher because it explains a lot of other things to come. And I was very free-spirited and creative and had this dream of being the next Michael Jackson and was chasing that dream. And then through a cosmic series of events, I used to like win airband competitions and would impersonate him. It's a whole thing. That's just an aside for another time.
I feel like that can't be an aside. Like,
you're like,
video
stop.
out there of that. Yeah.
There is. There is the most epic video from high school when I emerged as Michael Jackson at 16. Probably not the most like moral and like uplifting person, but it's the dance. I loved the moonwalk.
Dance.
You have to tell me on Michael Jackson.
I know.
Yeah.
It was a time.
For sure.
So I never wanted to be a teacher. My dad was the principal of the biggest high school in my very small hometown, and everybody was like, the last name like Vardabasso. They're like, oh, you're going to be just like your dad. I was like, no, I'm going to be Michael Jackson. So I won't even get into the story. A cosmic series of events. I ended up back in education, but I made myself the promise that if I was going to go back into the school system, I would be a person who would change it. I wanted to be a change agent, and I didn't want things to be like when I was in school. I wanted to create the conditions for a little creative like me to thrive. So went into the classroom, taught for about 7 years, did high school, middle school humanities. And I would say right within the first year, like you called me an assessment revolutionary, which is interesting because I never chose that for myself. I think the extent of my assessment training in university was here's formative, here's summative, moving on. And that was about it.
That is about it.
So in the first year, I was like, okay, I'm after empowerment. I want these students to find their voice and figure out who they are. I was like, ooh, assessment's a bit of a problem around all of that.
Yeah.
So I always say it's like the loose thread on the well-worn sweater of school. And I just started tugging on it right on that first year. And the more I tugged, the more everything that we'd come to accept unraveled, especially around the culture of compliance that I remember so much from school. And so I literally feel like my career has just been me like yanking on that thread, and it just keeps taking me in a new direction. So then I moved into instructional coaching, and they quickly realized like assessments are a thing. So within a few years, I kind of worked myself into an assessment lead position. And then over a 3-year period, like I was just saying to Nick and Margie, had like a bootlegged master's in change, because that was something you really don't expect when you leave the classroom for the first time, that it's not about just saying, here's what worked for me. Everyone do it, which I thought would work. It went horribly. It was, that would only work for your students, or my kids can't do that, or that's not how we do things here. All of the things. So over a 3-year period, we made a lot of change. All the things. Oh, if I don't grade it, the students won't do it. All of it. We implemented a K-12 progress reporting system designed around competencies. So co-created with all the teachers. Built this huge coalition of people. I'm a big believer in building a network and not taking this on alone. I think deep down, everybody wants change. You just have to meet them where they are and then bring them into a community. And so I basically worked myself out of a job, which is the problem if you figure out how to make sustainable change. They didn't tell me I have to leave, but when you just know, you're like, I am not needed here anymore and I want to make an impact. So I accepted some work with a company called Solution Tree. So I do contracts with schools and districts to support them in their assessment and grading transformation journeys. And then I guess I'm now an entrepreneur, which I'm trying to get better at saying without being all weird when I say it.
Yeah.
Apology. It's, all it means is I saw a problem. And the problem was, if you're a change agent in the education system, there's not a lot of supports in place for you, but there is a lot of brick walls and pushback. There's a lot of isolation these people feel, especially if they're trying to talk about assessment and grading in a context that's not ready for that conversation. So I was like, I need to build something for these folks. And so I've been on a design thinking journey through empathy into prototyping. And now we're in the kind of launch test phase of the empowerment ecosystem community for leaders that are looking to build empowering assessment systems.
That's amazing. So I'm really fascinated.
You're like, has it been 20 minutes?
No.
No, not at all.
That you're leaning in to check the time. I was like, oh, sorry.
No, my goodness. No. And so when you say the entrepreneurial part of it, how did you even find your way in that forest? Like, how did that come about?
Okay, this is the actual story, Margie. If I'm being honest, it was the day after it was the first Monday I wasn't in my job, and I'm laying in bed, and like everything's crashing down, right? I'm like, I need to be doing something. I need to be doing. What should I be doing right now? Oh my gosh! And I Googled how to build an online course, and it led me to a YouTube video of someone who was like from Vancouver, similar age to me. So right away I connected with her just on like an identity level, and she's like, "Here's all the things you're going to think you need to do, and here's why they're wrong." And it was such a well done video. I just went down this rabbit hole of all of her content, and then eventually invested money to work with her and have her as a mentor, because she builds businesses around online programs, but her foundational values are abundance and reciprocity and community. So I just really aligned with that. And that it was probably the best thing I ever did. At the time, my partner was like, "What did you do your first day alone? And you literally just invested money, like get someone to teach you. Like, what is this?" But then 2 weeks later, he was like, "Best thing you could have done," because it just gave me a structure and someone to like hold me accountable. Because we're going to talk about failure today. Everyone says entrepreneurialism is a roller coaster. You hear it all the time, and then you actually jump into the waters, and it's like the rejection and the failure you go through on a daily basis is so fast and furious, and you have to just keep moving forward and have this sense of it'll all work out. And I know I'm on the path and going in the right direction, even if it feels like there's some weeks where I've done absolutely nothing right. So
how do you
find you both entrepreneurs?
I guess if this podcast counts.
Yeah, totally.
So I run I'm a professor. I teach in a humanities department at a community college now, but I also run a consulting company where I do professional development and coaching for districts. So I do that on the side, and then this too. So I totally feel your ups and downs, and actually our podcast on Tuesday was about like Margie and I, ironically enough, have this podcast about failure, but all of last week was just like this really long string of failures that we just like couldn't get out of each other's way. And so it was really interesting to kind of unpack that on Tuesday. So that's really, really germane, I guess is the word, to our week. So
you're like, we talk about failure. You're not supposed to experience it. What is this?
Experience it to the point of like, we don't even have content to put out on the day we drop. So, Nick drops the content on, for Thursdays, and we're like, we got nothing. So I put like a little thing up on our social media of like, a piece of toast burning coming out of the toaster. It's like, guys, we're toasted this week. Like, we failed.
On
like,
brand.
How ironic. Yep. Just put it out there.
What was even like more disturbing about it is we had come back from speaking at our first conference. Like, we went to EduCon in Philadelphia, and we're speaking at this really, really, what I think of as like the best education conference in the country. Despite like, it's still a relatively small conference, but you have these really sharp people talking about project-based learning and all this stuff. And so I came back like just on fire in a way that like I hadn't felt in a while. And then like you walk back into the disaster that is, our real
reality.
It's like, what?
Reality.
So, oh wow.
Yeah, we're all like high five and Saturday night. This is great. You know, all this great stuff that's happening at the conference and everything. And then, you know, by Wednesday night, it was like, this is not happening. Like, you know, we got nothing. And it was just like, how, like, what in the world? These last like 3 days, just all, but that's what it is. Like you said, that's the failure thing. But I was curious as to when you said with that entrepreneurial and like things coming at you, you know, with like, you know, the no's or the rejections or what feels like failure. What are your guideposts for you, or what have you found to be your personal guideposts, if you will, to help you stay the course, to not give up, to say, you know, this is a whitewater raft and I may have just fallen out, but I still have the helmet on. I'm still holding on. I can climb back in. Like what for you feels like that?
Two answers to that, I would say, and they're kind of integrated, but some practices I have that I do every day and values. And that's like a huge part of the coaching I do in the community that I set up, because it's the same types of stuff you have to use to ride the white waters of change in a complex system, because it can feel like you're going backwards sometimes. You're upside down. You're not totally sure, but you're like, I think we're on the right path. Have I made a horrible mistake? Am I going to ruin everything? And so you need something. And I always I'll say to the leaders I work with, like, alignment doesn't exist out there. It exists in here. Like, we are the only people that can give ourselves a sense of alignment. And if you're waiting for someone else to tell you, it's going to be a very frustrating journey for you. So I'll actually show you.
Yeah.
I went on this awesome retreat and I did a deep dive into my values. So there's my vision board over there with the colors and the textures that really drew me in. And then from there, I defined my core values and I actually separated for the first time in my life, my personal and my professional, as I started entrepreneurialism, which was really new for me. I've always let those be really integrated. And I was like, I'm holistic. And I've found that because I'm working from home and there's so much of myself in all aspects of the design and I'm the CEO, it was quickly taking over my whole life. Like, I was just working 24/7. And in like the first 2 months, I had to write myself a letter as an employee to their boss being like, you suck. You're a horrible boss. Like, you don't give me breaks. Like, I can't sleep, because I was like, whoa, what is happening? Because it was the first time in my life since I was 15 years old, I didn't have a superior. Like, so when people joke or say that, you know, entrepreneurialism is spiritual, like, it really is, because you have to untangle all of the stuff you've always accepted to be true. So my core values for my work are community, communication, and transformation. So I try to always come back to that. So what communication do I need to do right now? What transformation do I need to make? How can I change? And how can I lean on others? Like, every time I feel like I'm getting like, and I'm in my head, I'm like, book a meeting with someone. Like, who's someone you trust? Who can you talk this out with? Like, or every single week, I try to open myself up to meeting new people. Like, I'm networking like crazy right now, and every seed I plant comes back in the most magical ways. So there's that. And then I would say, to help myself kind of stay on that path, and, you know, seeing the vision board is one thing. Every morning, one of my mentors gave me this practice, and it's changed everything for me and allowed me to lead change. And then I think prepared me for this, but I do a morning page in a journal. And on that page, I write, I will let go of, and I finish that sentence. And then I say, I am grateful for, and I finish that. And then I say, today I will focus on, and I don't let myself put something that's like productivity oriented. I'll say something like, today I will focus on play. And I try to just let that be my mantra throughout the day. Like, every time I catch myself getting into a frazzled, and like, play, like, what's the playful thing to do right now? Like, do you need to put on headphones and dance? Do you need to do the moonwalk? Like, what is it?
There you go.
And so I find it's kind of all of that type of stuff, which, like, you, like, working from home, I don't have a commute. I don't have colleagues other than my cat disrupting me. So I really have to be intentional about putting a lot of these practices, like, into my schedule: time to reflect, time to walk, time to journal. Otherwise it could be really easy to get in your head and just start to loop and overthink things.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. I like that. That practice is very, you know, having that grounding, what will I let go? Like, to start with that. That's, you know, interesting. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm assuming you both have a way you sound like similar types of people to me that are
Well,
walking through some muddy waters at times.
Neither one of us started out to be teachers. So I think that, that is kind of an interesting bonding piece right there. And, one of a book that Nick recommended to me, and I'll let you talk about, Artist's Way, and talks about journaling. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, right. Like, I definitely had no interest in being an educator. And I didn't know, though, what I wanted to do. And weirdly enough, it was taking a job in the wine industry, because we're in I'm in the Finger Lakes region, so there's a lot of wineries here in the New York State area, and I was doing wine education classes, and I was like, "This is cool," and then I was like, "Wait a minute, I could actually do this for a job, like not just once a month, And I was like, "Oh, that's cool." So ended up teaching, and actually, Natalie, you'll enjoy this a little bit. So I was student teaching with, so I was working under a professor who I thought was awesome, Dr. Russell Coward, out of St. John Fisher College, or University now, in Rochester. And he was great, like very inspiring, deep. I actually had some really deep assessment instruction with him. But when I went to my first school placement, and my first experience was like, here's the worksheet, fill out the worksheet, get the worksheet back, I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. And he was like, well, I don't blame you, but that's not what actually matters. So what you saw was like what you don't want to be. And then you just kind of think about like how you want to think, what you'd want your students to take away from your class, or, what is deep learning and things like that. So I had this my first experience with assessment was a really awful experience with assessment. First hands-on experience. So, so that was kind of transformative though. And, but like you, I am probably a workaholic maybe. And so I can easily work 24/7. Much to Margie's chagrin, because she'll get 6 o'clock emails like, "Hey, what do you think about this idea?" She's like, "Good morning." Oh yeah, all right. Yeah. So I have to be more intentional. I'm working on it. So
you've come a long way.
Lifelong practice.
Exactly.
Yeah. Totally.
So, as we've said, this is your story to tell. So when you think about failure, what's what does that mean for you?
Oh, I feel like if I were to answer that question as Natalie in the K-12 school system, it'd be a very different answer than Natalie, the entrepreneur. Growing up, I had my dad was an immigrant from Italy, super competitive. He was also my principal. And so the first question he would ask, yeah. Oh yeah. He eventually moved schools. So it's a whole other thing. But we get home from school, and around the kitchen table, we all played tennis competitively as a family. So in a tennis, if you serve and the other person can't return it, it's an ace. So he'd always ask when we sit for dinner, did you ace it? And that ingrained itself in my psyche so young that I really started to believe that everything was the aim for 100%, and anything less than that was failure. Even if I got 99, my dad's first question would be like, well, where'd the other 1% go? And so I feel like throughout my K-12 experience, because of the percentage grading system, because of the traditional practices where it was all about point accumulation, I ended up in this place where I was in a mental purgatory between a crippling fear of failure and an obsessive quest for perfection, that if that last story about me overworking myself is any indication, it's something I'm still trying to unlearn to this day, that there's to try to pit perfect and failure to get, it's just a losing game. There's nothing good to come of that. And obviously now that I'm much farther along in life and I have learned so much about assessment and grading, I can recognize now how the system that I was in for 18 years of my life contributed so much to this core belief and story that I was telling myself about failure and about perfect and perfection. So I think that's actually a big part of the driving factor to why I do everything I do. Because as I know firsthand from actually being out there and creating and trying to make an impact on the world, failure is just, that's natural. that's human. And if you're not failing, you're not actually doing anything. You're not really trying anything. You're like, I don't know if it's possible to do anything, like any job, and not have moments of failure all the time. But when we're in the school system, like, and especially if you have pressure from your parents and, you know, you're in a family like me where there's a lot of pressure to get straight A's, it's obsessive. Like it is such a deep fear that like the trigger I feel to this day when I feel like I failed someone or I failed it, like it's fascinating. So I think the answer I would have now, like what is failure really? It is learning. Like that just is learning. It's the system that you're in giving you feedback and letting you know the results of the actions that you've taken, helping you to stay the path. It's the thing that kind of gets you back on track and helps you know, am I aligned with my values? Am I aligned with my vision? Am I going in the right direction? But there's so much unlearning we have to do in our education system to allow that to be a reality.
I think you hit on a really many points. The unlearning. I like the unlearning because that's so much of it. Sorry, Nick, go ahead.
No, you're fine. One of the things we talked about in Philadelphia was just like, how do we systematize failure? Like make it an intentional practice to talk about, and not in a like, how do you avoid it way, but like, how do we almost encourage, maybe it's vulnerability more, like how do we get kids and adults to talk about their own failures in a more nuanced way rather than like, hey, we just have to avoid this failure.
Yeah, you already said the word, like vulnerability, the psychological safety that adults feel in that building is going to be the first factor that impacts whether they're comfortable to talk about themselves not being perfect. And I feel like you've got to change the systemic thing that is the elephant in the room impacting both the adults and the kids, which is every time you make a mistake, it's going to impact your bottom line. It's going to impact your grade. So we say out of one side of our mouths, like, take risks. It's fine. Failure is important. It's a part of learning. And then the kid makes a mistake and their average drops 10%. So we're not actually saying that we value it at all. We're actually communicating the opposite. So we have to look at our assessment and grading systems and get grading completely out of the assessment process, like as far to the end as possible. In a perfect world, I would love for it to not be about points at all. Like it really should be about curating a body of evidence and being able to tell your story as a learner and about what you're learning. And there's some interesting companies really on the front lines of trying to make that happen, like Mastery Transcript, and I'm sure many others will come along. But we've got to get grades and points and this traditional system that we've inherited back when we had curriculum guides and it was just about covering topics. And so it made sense to just be like, oh, how many things do they know about this topic? Check, check, check. All right, I can slot that in like an accountant. Like we don't even have curriculum that's designed like that anymore. So the fact that we still have so many systems that are stuck in this traditional paradigm of point accumulation based on curriculum guides is completely fractured with the actual like outcomes-based or standards-based reality that we're living in. And I don't even know if the answer, like I waffle, I go back and forth. I think standards-based grading is a huge jump forward from the percentage-based 100-point scale. And I will acknowledge that and be so happy if anyone's willing to take that jump. But I still think we're now at a point where we're trying to figure out what's beyond. There's such an awareness about as soon as we create this comparative analysis where we can rank and sort against each other, and we're not looking at ourselves and our own growth and who we are becoming. Like, I think we keep losing the plot, and it just keeps going back to failure is I'm not measuring up to these levels or these points or these other people. But like failure should be something that is because of the result of your actions, because you have agency and you're inspired and you're doing something. And I think when we're in that mindset, like all of us can embrace failure. I think it's very natural for us as humans to be like, oh, but it's tough when you've had these pathways carved in your brain over years and years and years of like, failure is bad. Here's your point removal. Here's your 0 on this. Here's your penalty for this. It feels there's still a lot of shame wrapped up in it.
Oh, I definitely. And I think some of the shame comes when you were saying about going from the curriculum to the standards base. Excuse me. How many times I've been in groups or committees, like when I was still in the classroom, where they're taking the standards and converting them to points or breaking down to the 1, 2, 3, 4. And it was like, this is exactly what we're trying to say is not, and it ends up being that number, and trying to get people to see that holistically, or, student agency with, what about student goal setting? What about student record keeping? Having them be in charge of their learning, and that idea of competency base and what equates to a competency, and even having those conversations is so scary for, teachers still, because they only know that one system, and to try and understand the other system, they feel like they have to answer to parents who don't understand the system, and and like you said, it really comes down to that safety factor. So just like we say, Maslow's before Bloom's, and Maslow before Bloom's are there with students. It's true for the culture of the building itself. And if you don't have that culture, then that can't be there. My mantra sentence for this school year, because as I said earlier, I think before we started, my job is curriculum. One of my jobs, but is culture eats strategy for breakfast. And that's what I've been trying to say over and over and over. Right. And I apologize. I'm not attributing it to who said it. I can't think of the person's name right now. But it's so true. And so as we would start some of these discussions, some of these tougher discussions, and that we're digging into, and somebody would do that, it's not the way, it's not this, that. And I would say, pause and let's see if culture eats strategy for breakfast applies right here. And it's not exactly making me popular, but we're trying to just check our thinking. It's just trying to check our thinking, check where this is coming from. What is the genesis of this,
And that reminds me of a quote I once heard that says, culture is what we create every time we open our mouths. Ooh. And I think when you get into the adult work cultures, we're not getting points and grades on everything we do anymore. Most people are on a salary, it's a completely different paradigm. But I think the moment that a leader communicates to their teachers that it's not safe to make mistakes is when they say, they'll get up in front of everyone and say, okay, this is our year. We're going to innovate. We're going to try new things. Learning, it's awesome. And then a teacher does something that they didn't like in a meeting, or they get an email from a parent and they pull them into that one-on-one conversation in their office and say,
sorry.
It's all good. They're like, that was a problem. And it's as soon as that happens once, if you tell people it's safe and go try and do new things, but then you bring them into that room and you close the door and you give them just a little bit of feedback, which has been completely co-opted in the worst ways in adult culture. It usually just means I'm about to tell you something that annoys me and I need to get it off my chest. Nothing helpful about it to move anyone on their journey.
No.
Then you've ruined the culture. That story is now going to be shared with someone else, and you've created fear. No one else wants to be the next person pulled into the office for that one-on-one feedback. So it's so true. It's all about the culture and the safety that the adults feel to try something new. Because like you said, there's going to be moments of failure. You might communicate a new grading paradigm to a parent and not quite get it right. You might stumble on your words a little bit. Maybe they're going to take something out of context and get upset about it, but you can't get to the other side without going through the messy middle. There is always going to be a period of failure and struggle if we're truly learning, not performative learning like we do, where it's just the harvesting of points.
You hit it right there, performative learning. And for Nick and I in New York State, when APPR, the annual performance ratings, came out, though that just destroyed teachers as far as taking risks, because when you're sitting there literally calculating points for all of these different areas, and then hooking that to the performance of students. And even though that eventually became unhooked, you can't undo the damage that you were left with, the feelings, that came along with it, at least in my mind. That's totally my opinion. But I just feel that that was one of the things that really created a culture that made you afraid to take the risks. And that's sad.
Totally. And I mean, we look at education and you would think that we're the juggernaut of figuring out how to do learning. It sounds so obvious, right? But yet I feel like there's so many other industries that are doing innovative things, and they're agile, and the people are just diving in and figuring it out because they have to. And someone on the podcast once said he teaches high school business, and it got tweeted out, his quote, and people have been asking me about it. They thought I said it. And he said, if high schools were run like a business, they'd be going bankrupt.
Oh, yeah.
And
no question.
Someone asked me to explain it recently on a podcast. And I was like, here's what I think it means. In a business, now that I'm an entrepreneur, I know this very well. Your user or your customer is everything. Their experience, the impact you have on them, the fact that they leave being like, that was really valuable for me. That's everything. So if our user or our customer is the students, and our bottom line was their value in what it is we offer, yeah, we would go bankrupt.
You would absolutely go bankrupt.
So I look at, and I guess partly because I'm doing some work around this right now, but Chat GPT is a great example, right? So like we told kids when we gave them, not kids, sorry, all students really, when we give them assignments, like, you know, you have to finish this task. You have to, this writing task, right? And so now they can finish that writing task in less time by feeding it into Chat GPT. And we say we like honor the process of writing that, and that's why we're so upset with AI. But the reality isn't. That's not. I don't think that's the reality at all. I think the reality is we're terrified that what we do is irrelevant, and it's actually. And I will stand by that. And like the people who are most adamantly against AI are the ones I'm afraid of, because they are like actively refusing to accept their role in making education irrelevant. And that to me, it's malpractice, 100%. It is educational malpractice. And so I'm one of those people who actually embraces this AI movement for a lot of reasons, which this is not what we're talking about tonight. And I don't mean to take it over, but I think it's a really good example of how, like, that's who actually is running education right now, or who is exploring education, is like tech companies and, you know, people who are interested in doing the things that we haven't figured out how to do.
And so for those of us, those listeners who are not in the education field, Chat GPT is AI, is artificial intelligence. And so it is you can put a topic in and it will spit out a quote unquote original piece of writing. And so that's what I just like making sure people are, you know, who might not know what that is. If you're not in the field, you're like, wait, what is that? What does that mean? What's AI? What's Chat GPT? So, and there's, you know, it's created quite a stir.
I also know a lot of teachers that are very excited, though, not only from like what you're saying, Nick, like they're like, well, the possibilities, now what can we do? But one of my friends recently was like, Nat, I never have to write another student letter at the end of the year. So we'd have to do these like very detailed summary of like, here's what you did this year. She's like, I would just plug it in and say they did good in volleyball and that they need to work on, I don't know, study habits, whatever. But I bet I could write a beautiful letter, include a quote by Winston Churchill, like, done. You know? So there's so much benefit here too, that I think if any teacher is feeling unsure and wants to push back, like, question, what are those parts of your job that eat your soul? They take up so much time. I would bet they have something to do with writing. Yeah,
they do. That's all right.
Maybe you could use it. Just saying.
Right. And yeah, the preservationist mindset, I think I'm becoming really scared of a little bit, because I've watched it for the last, actually, and this is probably, so I was a principal through COVID, and then after COVID got out of that, partly because I watched how fast getting back to normal meant, like, let's go back 10 years. And we just dropped right back into like an educational framework that felt comfortable because we knew it, but it wasn't good for kids 10 years ago. And it's definitely not good for kids right now. Like,
yeah. I think that's such a fear right now in the field. Like, so many of the folks I've worked with through the program, when I ask them, like, you know, as I get to know them and, you know, as I welcome them into the program, a lot of them have said it's this regression and this inertia that they're seeing right now that is sparking their urgency to seize the moment. Because so many people did have a transformative experience in COVID.
Yeah.
And for the first time, you know, grading wasn't the universal motivator, because a lot of grades were frozen in places in Canada and the States, and a lot of standardized tests were canceled.
Yep.
So suddenly all of these things that you've used as kind of your what's the word, smokescreen for why you're keeping your practice the way it is, weren't there. and you had to find ways to engage your students. So it's really, I'm really trying to find, like, I'm like, what is the empathetic understanding of what people are doing? Because they've seen better, they've experienced better. And the only thing I can arrive at, and tell me if you see it differently, is the traditional approach is way less work and it's easier and it's more efficient. So the way they're looking at it is probably they're languishing, they're tired, and I'm trying to be empathetic here. I'm not saying I agree, but they're like, you know, I'm exhausted post-COVID. I'm like, I know I am. I know I don't have sometimes the stamina in the evenings I used to. I get mentally fatigued.
So true. So true.
Maybe that's it. Maybe they're just tired.
I think part of it is going back to something safe and known and something you can count on, you know, but like it or not, you know, it's kind of like that. Doesn't mean I like it. Doesn't mean I want to eat like broccoli every day, but I can count on it, you know, and it's just, you know, and there was so much in flux and so much all over and so much pushback, you know, parents upset about this or upset about that, or colleagues and just trying to balance their own children and their own lives and, you know, just loss and despair. And I think it's just like, let me go to a safe harbor, you know, and I'm not even saying I agree with the safe harbor. Let me go back to the safe harbor. And then, you know, to me, I think it's just more of that going to something familiar.
Yeah. Yeah. And hopefully just to re-energize.
That's what, you know, I think that the hard part then is the footing. And I don't know, I can only speak to New York State, or at least my experience in New York State through it. Again, I was also a principal at the time during COVID and reopening. And these things were being handed down by the state education department in the 11th hour. And they would usually come at 4 or 5 o'clock on a Friday for us to implement on a Monday, or like it's now this many feet apart, or a mask is a yes in summer school, or a yes in the school year, no in summer school, but yes again in the school year. And we're trying to, we were so pulled at trying to ferret out what had to be done in order for, you know, teachers and students to return, that was sane, but yet complied. And none of us really knew. And so then all of a sudden the teachers are waiting because they're getting it just as last minute as we are. Then the parent, you know, is getting it last minute. And the students are just like, what, huh? These poor, you know, kids, I don't care what age you were. It was like, can I, can't I? And I think everybody just, from my perspective, I know for me, just became gun shy. And that's the safety, go right back to safety, you know, just psychological safety, emotional safety, and risk-taking just becomes null and void. It was pure survival. And I think that that's a damage that it's just a recovery process. And I think that that is fraught with unknown growing pains too, because none of us have ever had to do this before. And those who are supposed to be providing guidance have never done it before, you know, and and it was very politicizing, or, you know, or not, well, it was very politicized, but it was very polarizing was the word I was going for, in many areas and many districts. Just very polarizing. Vaccine, no vaccine. Masks, no masks. It just became very, which side are you on? And that middle was like reduced, you know, and to me, the polarization that my experience was great.
Agreed. Yeah, it was a time. And I really hope that going through this, though, and people kind of consolidating, hopefully now, means that their resilience is just going to be stronger, because at least we've gone through this now.
Yes.
And I know we're living in what they call, you know, the VUCA times of volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. And so we're going to probably have another big unprecedented event, but I hope it'll be like a pendulum that eventually it's like, oh, we've seen this before. Like, we've been through this. Like, it's, you just have to build that muscle to be like, this is just, things change all the time. And I think it goes back to actually the question you were asking earlier about how do you stay the course? Like, how do you figure out in all of that? Like, that's why this personal growth and our core competencies is so important right now. Like, I really hope people from what they just experienced can see that it's like your own ability to self-regulate and to like have your own set of, who am I? What do I need to do? What are my values? How do I stay present and process in this moment right here? I can't try to figure it all out there, but like, I need to stay present, I think is what's still missing. I think we don't do enough of that, like social emotional support and learning with educators. In fact, I would argue a lot of competencies that we say our students need, we've never supported educators to have. Yeah. And the story that comes to mind for me was I was working with a high school math team, and we were going to make some learning progressions. And, you know, they talked about how math was something that was, problem solving was something that was a huge priority for them. No, it was collaboration. So they're like, it's collaboration. We want our students to work together better. They're so isolated. They need to work in teams. It's like, awesome. Let's go. So I was like, let's unpack it. What does good collaboration look like? And they looked at me funny. And after a few seconds, one of them said, is this a trick question? And I was like, no, like describe it to me. And they're like, well, I don't know. It's working together well. It's basically it. I'm like, oh my gosh, how are we ever going to teach and develop and offer feedback on a skill that we can't describe beyond just work together well? And then you look at them and you're like, oh, actually, now that I see this team and they're collaborating all the time, but it's not collaboration. It's cooperation at best, polite dysfunction at worst. So we don't know what these things are. We don't know what creativity is. Most teachers would still say, oh, I'm not creative. I'm not the creative teacher. So we don't even recognize that it's a process that can be labeled, named, developed. We can help people become more creative. So I think it's partly we have to go back and help everyone to develop that themselves too. So they even have the language to cultivate those conditions. And so I think that's why I'm so fired up about assessment, because the first question of figuring out your assessment system is, what do students need to know and be able to do? And for me, that was the turning point in my career where I realized I was going in with instructional strategies as a coach, being like, oh, this is the thing. Everyone do this thing. And most would be like, I'm good. That's your thing. Some might do it. And the next thing comes up and the same people are the same ones that come and drink from the pond again. And after a while, you're like, what am I doing here? Like, I'm just on this hamster wheel of like whatever book I just read. And like, I'm trying to prove myself to everyone. So again, that was my first kind of unlearning moment of the assessment system I'd inherited was, why am I seeking validation out there when we could be co-creating and building together and I like that. Finding validation in like, oh, we accomplished this together and it's in here. And that's kind of what led me down my journey of saying, let's co-create a competency aligned progress reporting system. And just, I was like, I can't do that alone. This is true collaboration because I cannot, even if I tried. You gave me a year and locked me in a room, I probably couldn't do that. I couldn't figure it out.
I think that's what's
missing.
Yeah, you hit that. Exactly. That's that fundamental, piece right there is I can't do this all alone. Like realistically, that can't happen. Any of our jobs in education, even if you are, a teacher in a classroom, there still is, you can't do every aspect of that alone, whether it's collaboration with your students, collaborations with the families, collaboration with your team or administrator. There still is that need for collaboration. Nobody can do this lift alone, nor should they, and the richness that comes from the co-creating, because none of us can see. I mean, we can only see I can't see behind me. I can't see below me. I can see above me until I turn to do that. But when I turn to do that, then I can't see over here. And that's that whole idea of a team. 360.
And that's how we build a resilience to failure, I think, too. Like, it's such a different experience to have something go wrong when you've been on your own trying to kind of like prove yourself to when you're working with a team or a community and everyone's like, well, that communication didn't line with parents like we were hoping. And then you own it as a group. And there was a few times I remember, like, because I was the lead, sometimes I'd get in my head about, I have the responsibility and things don't go well. It's going to be on me. And the community I worked with, like, we worked so hard at cultivating that trust and safety in it. They would always have me and be like, this is all of us. Like, and there was such a big group of us that we started with 6, we grew to like 45. Like, we joked we were the assessment army. And I think that's what allowed us. And it was during COVID that we made all these changes, like all, at a time. And a lot of people were like, it was COVID. Things really regressed. It's like, that was also perhaps one of the greatest opportunities that people chose to rise to the occasion and come together and be like, well, everything's changing anyway. So,
well, and I think that was a huge, huge opportunity. And I think that kind of going back to the earlier statement, I was sort of thinking as you were talking that I think that right there, that feeling of like, it's all up to me. I think that's another thing that a lot of educators and administrators feel very strongly. It's all up to me to fix or do. And this mantra of learning loss versus looking at, well, what are the learning gains? What are those resiliency skills that kids did determine, you know, and you as an adult did determine for yourself? What were those ways you did it, or did it differently and found success in it, or found like, I found this byproduct or result that I wasn't even looking for, you know, that's amazing, you know, and choosing to ask those questions versus, you know, they didn't read for 20 minutes a day or something like that. So I think that, like you said, those are all opportunities.
Absolutely. That is such a powerful point. I got to double tap on, like, the learning loss narrative also ruffles my, like, I struggle with it so much.
Yes.
Oh, and I think it's the problem with failure too. Like, we still treat that as like, it's always a loss. It's a loss. It's a loss in school, as opposed to like, what's the learning gain here? Okay, you lost a bunch of points, but we can't get past that to say, well, what was the benefit? Right. And even if you try, like, there's so much research that as soon as we bring points into any kind of a descriptive conversation about the learning,
shuts it down.
It's like null and void. We've just neutralized it. And
the research on, does kids look for the grade at the top? What's my grade? What's my grade?
Yeah.
There isn't a grade.
Yeah.
And like, what? Yeah. Fascinating.
Yeah, exactly.
So what would you say
Sorry,
would
my
be...
dog is barking.
Oh, is that Lucy?
It's all good.
So what would you say if you could, when it comes to the idea of like co-creating or reimagining, whether it's assessment or just how to view things, what would you say, like, these would be my suggestions for a top 3? Like, start here, ask these 3 big questions to start that process.
For assessment?
Oh, sure.
You're talking like for assessment? Yeah. I think
one to redesign or reimagine assessment.
Okay. Well, I'm going to give you an acronym that I've come up with to like really simplify, because at the core of the paradigm shift of assessment, I think, is we are at a place where we have to recognize that a lot of us are still seeing it as a noun, and we need to view it as a verb. So back when we were in that curriculum guide day, it was just about each assessment was a way that we gathered information, quantify that in points, put it in the grade book. And I think a lot of people and students still see it that way. It's the things teachers do to evaluate what you know. And you can tell when people are in that paradigm because they always put an S on the end. My assessments. I'm like, aha. But if we view it as a verb, and this is really like, there's been a robust landslide of research in the past, you know, since the late 90s and the standards movement and all of that, that says it's really these interconnected set of actions that we have to do to ensure that learning happens. And so those actions begin with being very clear about what students need to know and be able to do, creating architecture to ensure that our formative pathways arrive at summative outcomes, calibrating our interpretations of success with one another, using feedback in a way that elicits a productive response, in having students invested throughout the entire process, thinking about the emotional affect of, like, all of that's all a process that's interconnected. And so to try to
Natalie,
like really break that down.
I'm like, say that again, Natalie. That was so beautiful. I could cry. Or like, preach it.
Oh my gosh, I know. Just coming in hot. Favorite thing to talk about.
Exactly.
So I was like, okay, that was a lot. So I'm like, some folks are like, whoa, what's the process? So I was like, we need to simplify it. We love a good acronym. And also Michael Folan talks about simplexity, right?
Yes.
Let's take something very complex and make it sound very simple. And then we can we'll go from there. So my simplexity for assessment is just remember voice. Through all the research, if we do that process well and we take all those actions and we put them into a system, we create the conditions for learners to find their voice. So if we know that's the outcome, I remember it with a verb for each one. So vision, optimize, invite, cultivate, and expand. I used to say evaluate at the end, and I realized that was my own unlearning I had to do. It shouldn't be about evaluating, which is very like, here's the one answer. It's about expanding through sharing the story of learning. So we'll hit you with the top 3, because I think those are 3 really important questions to start with. Vision, and, you know, a lot of the PLCs at work type of literature would support this, is you have to first answer, what do students need to know and be able to do? Keyword there being need. Not, what are all the things in your curriculum? List them all for me. What are the things that you are going to commit personally, or even better as a team, that this is non-negotiable? All students will learn this. They need to learn this. So you've clarified those things. Cool. The next question is, what is the pathway to success to get there? So this is the unpacking piece. Like so many people will say it's non-negotiable that our students develop critical thinking. And then when it comes time to unpack it, they go, oh, well, only the students know. It's their competencies. Only they know. And right away I'm like, okay, it's because you don't know. And you're too scared to admit that you actually don't know what critical thinking looks like, let alone what's the first step, what's the next step, how do we know we're on the right path? Like there's a lot that you have to learn in there and actually like build your body of knowledge about what that looks like. And so this is where we might create assessment tools and rubrics. And I always tell people they're not the end game. They're just an artifact of what we know thus far. And as we co-create with our learners, as we gather evidence, we're just going to constantly evolve and update those as our learning updates. So that's the next question. And then one that I have been realizing more and more, and sometimes isn't captured in all of the like assessment research in the early 2000s, but is coming out more now, is that invite phase is so important. And specifically, I think we have to invite rethinking. So the question I would ask there is, what rocks do we have to kick off the pathway to success? Because I think we don't often take stock of the limiting beliefs that whomever the learners are, adults or kids, are coming in with, and treat that as our pre-assessment. I think people will say, oh, well, we're going to develop critical thinking or creativity. That's a great one. So many kids, even by the age of 12, 13, have already decided they're not creative.
I know. It's so sad.
So if you're not going to use that first piece of diagnostic assessment and do something about it, you're not going to be very successful. You can create all the activities because Cultivate's all about creating the experiences, but you're not going to move very far. You got to check in and invite rethinking. So that requires a whole different set of skills that I think we're just starting to learn more about and people are writing more about. And I think what happened during the pandemic and the resurgence of Black Lives Matter, this concept of unlearning is really starting to take hold. So those would be my 3 questions. It would be around, what do students need to know and be able to do? How do I optimize the pathway for success? And then how do I kick rocks off of that pathway and invite rethinking?
I am like fangirling right now. I'm going to make like t-shirts and like all these acronyms and be like, everybody.
Oh, I've got like a whole screensaver if you want it. I got really excited one day when I discovered the acronym. I was like, it actually works.
No, it's amazing. I'm sitting here going like in complete awe. So yes, this is Natalie, you're amazing.
Thank you.
Natalie, a lot of what you're talking about are like, when you were going through kind of your assessment system, and I don't know I'm not sure how widely this is talked about, but like MTSS is like a major part of what, my work is around, my consulting work, but also what Margie and I sort of talk about all the time is, multi-tiered system of supports, which is like a really interesting way to talk about really interesting stuff, right? Like,
that's a good way to put it.
How do we know when our students are growing, and like, what are those metrics even look like?
And what are we measuring for? When? Why?
Like, what are we doing this for? That's like my,
core question.
Why are we doing this again?
That's a good question to always ask, which is why? Yeah. I wish more people were comfortable with it. I think a lot of folks still hear that question and assume it's an attack.
Yes. And I think because in some ways it was. Yeah.
And looking at the narrative around AI right now, like that's what is so funny. Like, well, how are students ever going to learn critical thinking if they don't write essays? And that to me is my favorite one to respond to. You know what? In so many other ways. And they'll learn how to write too, even if they don't have to write essays, because there's lots of ways to use AI in critical ways that it could actually be better.
Yeah. Yes, and to all of that.
Love it.
I think this is such an opportunity for us finally to embrace performance assessment.
Yeah.
And to think about how we do things more authentically. I don't know. I just feel like there's nothing but good that's going to come of this. Because I'm sure when the internet first came out, I don't quite remember, I was a little young, but there probably was a lot of people that were like, oh, this is going to ruin education.
Oh, absolutely.
Everything is destroyed. And like, here we are now. So
yeah, definitely.
Well,
it's growing pains, right? It's growing pains.
Yeah.
I like to remind people that when the bicycle came out, this is totally pulled from David McCullough's book on the Wright brothers. But when he goes into this one section where he talks about how when the bicycle came out, there was a lot of concern around teenagers riding bicycles because it was going to wreck the moral fabric of society, because then they didn't have to walk with their parents when they went on dates. They could ride the bicycle off into the sunset and do whatever teenagers do. And so I think, there's always a fear of the unknown or the new.
Always. And it doesn't matter what it is. Yeah. There's always that. Well, Natalie, we are so grateful for you to stretch our thinking and our understanding, and for sharing all of this. And it's just been so exciting to have you on. And I can't wait to listen to your podcast, EduCrush. I'm looking forward to that. And it's just exciting to have these collaborative discussions.
Oh,
for sure.
Absolutely. I am so thankful to be here. Thank you for having me.
Natalie, before we go, how do people get a hold of you if they want to get a hold of you?
Mm-hmm. Best way is probably through Twitter. I'm on there a lot, as you know, Nick. So my handle on there is @Natabasso, Natabasso. I'm also on Instagram, same handle. I'm not as active on there, but I'm trying to create more educational content. Those are probably the best ways. The other option is you can always email me directly if you have any questions, or you're curious about the empowerment ecosystem or anything I'm doing. It's my first initial, last name, and Vardabasso @gmail.com. That'd be the main ways.
Nick is great about putting all that in show notes. So
appreciate it. Thank you.
I can definitely do that. And all right, and I'll link EduCrush as well in the show notes.
Yeah,
EduCrush. Sorry, EduCrush.
EduCrush.
I apologize.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
All right. Well, I hope everybody has a great night. Natalie, the one thing we didn't talk about, and I feel badly in my pre-show email to you, was that we usually do a cheers at the end of every episode. But
so that just
even
means
if you have to
come back,
available,
right? That just means you have to come back. Water we can do.
Yeah, there we go.
I wish I could say there was wine in here, because it's like another little wine cooler.
That'll be next time. We'll plan for
I got you covered. I have some right here. So
nice.
We can cheers.
Water, So
perfect.
yes,
all right.
And
so cheers, everybody.
Cheers! Yay!
Yeah, I feel like I don't know if we're still recording. Oh, I was going to get a picture.
No, we're still recording.
We're good. You can cut this part out.
No,
ready?
No,
you want to do a cheers on
part.
here?
Yeah, absolutely.
Ready? 1, 2, 3.
Cheers.
Yay! Throw it on Twitter.
Awesome.
Tag y'all.
I love it. That's
all right.
great.
I'm gonna stop recording now.
Okay.